Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Hello, listeners and viewers. Welcome to the Pros and Cons episode 7 podcast. Welcoming today, we have Paddy Boylan.
Hi.
Ali Burnham.
Hello.
Phoenix Ragg.
Hello.
And Alex Eldridge.
Hello.
And I'm your host today, James Healy. Today's theme of the show will be about drafting and editing. What is everyone's process, where everyone is overall, and how are we all feeling about that? First, I'd like to go around and ask everyone, what are they consuming this week? What are you watching? What are you reading? And how is your writing going? Paddy, how about yourself?
Pause.
Okay.
Just not a lot on all fronts, man. I'll get back to you all. This is my response every week. It sounds like I actually don't do any reading or writing. I do. Just, this is a fallow period.
I don't actually like fiction.
Yeah.
Have an interest in it.
I can't read. I will endeavor to do better for next episode.
You're being graded on this, Paddy. It's a failed tutorial.
3 passes and we kick you out of the group.
That's reasonable. Yeah, fair enough.
All right, then. Jump over to Ali. How about yourself?
Well, to the surprise of no one, I'm still reading Moby Dick. I made good progress while I was away, though. I'd say I'm about halfway through. I was going to be like, I'm up to the bit where they're chasing the whale and realize that's not helpful. They're in the book I'm up to.
I think I'm up to that part and I'm not even reading it.
Oh, the whale. You mean Moby Dick? Like the white whale, right?
The bit where they're on the boat.
Ah, no, I'm with you.
And they're thinking about hunting that bit.
Is the whale not Ishmael? Does he not go, call me Ishmael, and then he just swims away? And
That's it.
Call me Ishmael.
The twist is the whole book is from the whale's POV. Yeah. He's just hiding with the jacket the whole time.
That would be actually a really interesting retelling, to be honest. I would read that. Maybe a bit shorter, but
Yeah.
Then the whale pops up and says, call me Ishmael. And
who's this Moby
like,
Dick? No,
I'm drunk.
Yeah. I want to read that now. In terms of what I'm watching, I'm actually watching Peaky Blinders at the moment. I know I'm late to the Peaky Blinders party, but I'm on to about season 2 now. And I'm impressed because it's one of these shows that's actually getting better. I feel like shows either go one way or the other. They're either the first season's amazing and you proceed to be disappointed by every season that comes after it. Or some shows take a while to find their feet. So you stick through season 1 and then it ramps up. And that's what Peaky Blinders is doing. And so I'm having a joy watching that.
Sam Neill's Irish accent is very questionable, though.
But entertaining.
Yeah, he's great, but yeah, just spent a little longer in the oven.
Phoenix, how about yourself? What are you watching and reading this week?
Well, my partner and I last week we're doing a little bit of a break from watching things at the moment because we were like watching a lot of stuff, it felt like, at night. So we're like, all right, little few week break. But before that break, we watched Deadpool because my partner hadn't seen it. And I'm still reading Lord of the Rings. I've been plowing through that. I'm now halfway through the second book. Which crazy thing I didn't know, he doesn't structure them like they're 3 books, but they're a direct continuation. He writes it as though there's no gap in the books. Like you can just stack all 3 on top of each other and page through them. And like he doesn't drop a beat. Like it's literally like you end book 1 and it hardly even feels like a conclusion. You open book 2 and it's just like, and Aragorn was running and it's like, oh, okay, we're just going.
I feel like fantasy doesn't usually do that. They have a whole lot of setup every time.
Yep. I was really glad he didn't, because I was like, no, don't take me out. Like, just put me back in. Like, what's going on? So that's cool. Yeah, that's been about it.
Cool. And Alex, how about yourself?
I've been reading a bit of Bret Easton Ellis, Rules of Attraction, which is just rich college kids just screwing and doing stupid shit. It's fun. It's well written. It's a little bit like eye rolly, but it is good. I do enjoy it a lot. And then also I've been listening to a podcast called I think it's Wolf 359. It's like it's an audio drama about basically three cosmonauts who go into astronauts. I don't know. They're in space on a space station, and like just spooky, weird shit happens, and it's just a little bit funny, a little bit spooky. It actually finished a couple of years ago, but no, I've been going through that, and that's been pretty interesting. Very episodic, very like little 15-minute chunks. But yeah, no, it's good.
Are they Russian or American?
Well, one is Russian, I believe, and then two are American, and then there's a ship computer.
So that's the distinction. The Russian's called the cosmonaut, and the other two are astronauts.
Oh, is that right? Huh.
That's as simple as it is.
Oh, there you go. And now I know. See, this is why I'm on this podcast. So learn these. I'm never going to make that mistake again. Thank you, Elliot.
Nice. And I'm still reading Interview with a Vampire, which I'm absolutely loving. It's just getting better and better. And I'm reading another book by Robert Greene called Conclave, which is about the like secret vote that the bishops do for the new pope. So it's just a story from the perspective of one of those bishops involved in the secret. They all get together in a room and they all have to like kind of campaign between each other and vote amongst themselves. And
James,
it's all about
every time you talk about what you're reading, I'm like, ah, damn, I wish I was reading that. I need to get a list of your reading material sometime. Because
I'll send you some stuff. Definitely check out Robert Greene. I think you'd be really into that.
Yeah, I read Hyperion. That was really good. You recommended that to me.
Yeah, I love that book. Yeah, so good.
Yeah.
So Conclave is just about all the politicking and the backhanded deals and the kind of sabotage and stuff that all of the bishops are doing against each other with the backdrop of like, what does God want? Versus all the personal goals. So that's really good and really helpful for editing, because I'm editing Cooling Engines at the moment and I've kind of got that kind of idea in the back of my head and I'm kind of like trying to navigate through that. All right, so I guess we'll jump into our team. Being drafting, not quite. Are we discussing first drafts, or are we kind of just jumping straight into? Yeah, okay. So
I think first drafts as well, right?
Yeah,
part of the process.
Sure.
So, pretty much the whole writing process then for a nice narrow scope. First drafts, editing,
writing.
Yeah.
Well, James, you were talking about like you're reading Conclave at the moment and gets you in a good headspace for writing. I've found with my first drafts, what I'm reading is such a big influence on how that first draft turns out. It's almost like you've got the soundtrack to whatever book you've got like playing in the back of your mind, and you can't help but write through that lens. I don't know if you guys are like that, but if next time I start a first draft, I almost want to read some really good fiction around that just to put myself in a good headspace for it.
I have heard of writers doing that a lot, being like, it's like you're reading diet essentially. Like, especially if you're writing something quickly, it's good just to be surrounded by that. Like, I don't know about you guys, but personally, I just will always just like reach out to whatever's there. But I would like to in future, when I start writing a new project, like program a few other books that I'm reading, or was one book at a time, to make sure that I'm staying within that zone, just to keep within it.
Yeah, a lot of the books that I pick are kind of based on what I'm planning to be reading. Either I'll pick a non-fiction book that is about subjects that would be useful, or I'll pick a fiction book which is maybe set in a similar setting to what I'm writing about, or maybe follows similar themes. Yeah.
It also just helps with hunting comparative titles while you're in the writing process as well. So like when you're at the pointy end and you're thinking about querying and you need to be like, all right, what have I actually produced? What is it like? If you've already done that groundwork organically, read widely while you've been writing things that are similar, you'll be like, well, out the other end, I actually, even though I aimed for it to be like this, it's turned out more like this one. And
what's querying?
That same... well, querying, Paddy, is when you like write out a query letter to an agent or a publishing house, but I think usually an agent, and they go like, oh, okay, cool, this is good, we will pick this up. But the same process can be said that like searching for titles and things for the self-published market, because a lot of those things, especially like BookBub, basically you get to select an author, like, look, what is this like? And, you know, if I'm doing horror, I'd be like, oh, well, Stephen King. Sure, that might be fine, but his reader base is going to be massive. So if I drill down into someone like Andrew McGahn, who's far less known, but maybe much closer to what I'm actually doing, that readership will be smaller and be more likely to pick up my thing. So it's good for, and Facebook as well, you know, like for marketing, going like, hey, you know, people have read this book or this genre, or, you know, that sort of stuff. So it works really well on both fronts, I feel.
Cool. So I guess I'd like to just run around then and ask everyone, where are they in their own stages of writing at the moment? Are they in first drafts area, later editing point, or are they looking at final drafts at the moment? Alex, I'll start with yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently in, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but basically I've written the whole thing, been like, oh, there are massive gaps here in this, forced myself to reread through the whole thing, which for some reason that first reread I really struggle with. I don't know why, but gone, okay, identified the gaps, and now I'm filling them in. And I'm just about at the point where I'm going to fill in that last major gap. And then it'll be like, okay, this is theoretically the whole story. I should be able to read this from beginning to end through it. Now, what I assume is going to happen once I complete that is I'm going to go back to the beginning and read it through and just add things to it, because I'm a natural like taker-outer. I tend to write less than I need. So I'm probably going to need to just organically add 10,000 words of, you don't call it padding, but let's say flavor. Just to, you know, like get it to where I need it to be. And then from there, hopefully it'll be ready for a copy editor. And that's, you know, the next process.
If you're a taker-outer, don't you write more than you need and then subtract?
I heard Stephen King refer to it as like a putter-inner, like the opposite. Like I put more in than I need to. But I guess it's semantics. Yeah, exactly. But basically I am a subtractive, no, I guess it would be additive writer is technically the term, because I'm like, I need to, yeah. So.
Cool, okay. And how about yourself, Phoenix?
I am in the first of first drafts. Like I've gone through I'm a serial first drafter at the moment, but not like, I'm in an experimental phase, really. Like I'm kind of writing excerpts of novels and kind of seeing what lands, like what feels right and what I want to do with this material. So I'm still kind of feeling my way through this very early space. Particularly with this new piece that I've been writing, I want to get essentially, I've mentioned on a previous episode, some of my other works like started as short stories and I tried to expand it and it didn't really work. This one's like, I have the whole novel in my head and I actually do want to write a bit of almost like a short story, but really just like a first draft, like enough to give it a really good feel. And then I actually want to reach out to some people, some experts on the field, particularly because I'm using a not so widely used language in it. And I want to reach out to those people that are fluent in that language and see if they can help me out a little bit, or if they have any recommendations, or like, as well as get a little bit of information on sensitivity. And I want to make sure I'm representing them well and things like that. So that's my first goal right now, is kind of get a good solid representation of the piece so that I could start to, my next stage of growth would then be like kind of putting it out a little bit to see what comes back. And then right from that place, the rest of the novel would come from there. But short answer, first draft, early first draft.
What is the language?
Ojibwe, I believe is what it is. And it's one of the more widely spoken Native American languages, but even still, it doesn't have very many fluent speakers. Let me just make sure I'm saying that right.
Yeah, it sounds like difficult territory to wade into. You really don't want to misrepresent a whole people.
Exactly. But it's Ojibwe, or at least that's how I'm saying it. But yeah, it's beautiful. Like, and doing deep dives into that language and how I love languages in general, and like a lot of Native American languages, or at least in this one that I'm looking into, like a lot of it is verbiage, and they refer to a lot of things in like action, like everything's in motion. Even like a Saturday. It's like it's a day that is currently Saturdaying. Like everything's kind of moving, and that's how they. I don't know that, and that's from my very high level understanding. But it's I love it.
We're Sundaying pretty hard right now, I think.
Yeah.
No, I like that. That's really cool. I like what you said. Just before someone else jumps in, I like what you said about like it's almost like trial running a draft of each different book. Because what I found with the one I'm doing right now is that the theme, or really the monster, like that is kind of the big bad at the end of the book, even now is not very coherent. Like it works, it's functional, but it's not like you can explain it and people will be like that. It's like, I'm very happy with how the characters have gone out, but if I'd been able to go back and go, well, look, actually I want to make it around this theme and then these characters here, and done a little, maybe 15,000 word trial run, that might have been coherent in that initial seed, and I might have more clarity in that. Do you know what I mean?
Are you still looking to kind of hone in on that idea? Are you trying to find it in the draft, or is
not
it
really? No, I think I'm happy with where it is now. It's not. I feel like the DNA of it is kind of where it is at this point. I mean, like I think it's maybe diminishing returns a little bit. I'm happy with the book as it is, and definitely the characters, but I feel like it will remain imperfect, and there's not much I can do to completely reinvent it. I think at this point it would be better to start with a new seed, which is not to say that I'm going to abandon it, but I just think I'm okay with it being an imperfect novel and just having its different sort of quirks of that.
You might yet find something, it might just click, and you might just be like, oh, this is what it is.
Yeah.
That's what happened to me with Last of Winter. When I wrote a good portion of that short story, I had no idea what the monster was. And then all of a sudden, it just because of other stuff I was reading, I was just like, oh, this is what it is and this is how it functions. And I had a really good idea of what it was.
Once again, the thing you're reading around what you're writing.
100%.
Yeah. Key takeaway.
Yeah.
Yeah, that listeners,
True.
Key takeaway.
Actually read books.
Or audiobooks.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a great moment reading all the comments all of you left on Stolen Sword as I was redrafting that. And kind of the very last nut for me to crack was being really clear about character motivations at the end. So for me, that was being like, what is the simplest way I can really break down and articulate to myself what the main character wants? And I finally had this kind of great aha moment where I was able to tie the mechanics of the world to his character arc. And when things like that just come together, it feels so good. So the example is I've got a main character who his magical power are these portals that he can jump through portals. He's basically got all these shortcuts. He can jump around the battlefield really quickly. And I've had my aha moment that he's not staying to do the hard work. He's escaping and trying to take the easy way out all the time. So the moment I was able to tie it to like his magical ability, and that's the thing he's wrestling with, I'm like, oh, that's poetic. I'm brilliant. So now I'm going through the draft and making that clear that the people around him are accusing him of like not committing and escaping, and it's it's visualized in his mechanical power now. So I'm like, it's always a nice feeling when that all comes together, and you can pretend it was that way from the start.
Like what you were saying about combing the hairs, like just because it's just that process of like just making sure it's all going one way.
For everyone playing along at home, what I was talking about is where the whole reason why we're together doing this podcast is we're writing an anthology, and then anthologies of science fiction and fantasy. And at the moment, we're on the third draft of all our stories. And we've got this process where all of us are providing feedback on each draft, and then we go and take that feedback and synthesize into the next one. And it's been a very interesting process, actually.
Yeah.
I'm nervous to look at. I still haven't looked at my feedback. I'm nervous to do it.
It's hard to start, but then once you get going, you're okay.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
We're all lovely and gentle to each other, but I think it was just this volume thing that we've never experienced before, suddenly you've got 5 sets of comments, and sometimes they're in argument with each other. So you just got to dive into this pile of being like, well, Patty and Alex don't agree on this. And then I'm like, well, what's my opinion? So you need to sit back and soul search a little bit.
I just naturally take the ones that agree with me. Disagreement, I'm like, yeah, Alex is right, clearly.
This is the obvious. Well, no, but you do have that authorial like final say there. So there's something to that. It's like if two people saying this is good and two people saying this is bad, and you're like, well, I thought it was good when I wrote it. Majority rules, right? Like,
And it is good to play to your audience as well. If there's someone who's liking what you're doing, it does make sense to follow that.
That's very true.
Yeah. At the same time, I know myself well enough now that if I get a comment on something and that I have a knee-jerk, like a irrationally angry response to it, that's me knowing I've been called on my own shit, and the comment is probably correct. So I have to. So my initial reaction is like, how rude, how wrong is that comment? And then I come back the next day once the anger's gone, and I'm like, oh shit, they're correct. Damn it,
got me.
So yeah, it's a subconscious. If a comment makes me angry, at this point, I know I probably need to listen to it. And it's taken me 6 years to get to that point. But my emotions will now tell me what comments are correct and what are not.
Know thyself.
Yeah, that's a good instinct. There is a lot to be said for like learning how to take criticism. You often have a sense of, like, oh, I really liked that line.
Yeah.
It's just like, that line doesn't work here.
Oh, so many times. Yeah, the struggle is real with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of like you're creating this whole thing, and then like it feels like, a giant like God is coming in and like smashing up your world and be like, no, this is shit, take this out, like, and it's just like, oh God, it was perfect, But at the end of the day, it's like, oh no, actually that works.
Sometimes I scroll the lines I like away, and I don't actually delete them. I just hide them somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I save them. Well, I was like, they're like smashing. I was like, I just like put them. I was like, oh, I'll get rid of it. I put it in my pocket. And just kind of like put it over there.
I always do that. I never delete anything permanently. I keep like a trail of drafts behind me. I never want to get rid of anything permanently.
I might just insert it in a different story.
Yeah.
Like if I love the line, I'm like, well, I still like that. I'll just recycle that.
Yeah. In my current, I am writing, just like not at the moment. I'm in the first draft, but because of the writers group that we all met in, which is part of like a wider group, part of Writers New South Wales, I was writing the first draft at the same time as we were having those writers group meetings. So every time I would write something new, I would bring it to the group, they would give feedback, and then I'd rewrite it, and then I'd rewrite it. So I mean, it's weird, like I am technically on my first draft, but I haven't written the whole story through yet. I'm drafting as I go, which frankly hasn't been, I mean, this is the first full-length work that I've written, but it hasn't been that enjoyable. When I start again, I actually want to give myself the freedom to just write a whole first draft.
Yeah.
Because it's like second guessing yourself the whole way during what should be this, like the first draft is the funnest part, right? Yeah, okay, well.
I definitely say it's the fun part.
None of it's fun. None of it's fun. Why do we do this? My dad wanted this for me. Yeah.
But yeah, it's what should be like the creative part. We're just not worrying about analysis.
Yeah.
I think that's been a mistake.
I would say, I think the fun part in writing comes to, like, there was a period of time where I was doing maybe 1,500 to 2,000 words a day. Actually, I averaged it, and it turned out it was just 1,000, but it was consistent anyway. And I think it gets to this point where once you hit a certain threshold, this sounds so airy-fairy, but I swear to God it's true. It feels like you stop like injecting energy into writing the story, and the story starts sort of writing itself. Like you get this feeling of like snowball effect where it's just like, oh, it's going now. Okay, I'm just going to sit here and read my book as it comes out of my fingers. And I think that's the fun bit. But you really need to work. It's like an uphill battle to get to the point where it's like, okay, so it's literally like pushing the boulder up the hill, and then it goes down. You just have to follow it. That's what I've found anyway.
Definitely, there's a point where you feel like you know the characters well enough to know how they will react in a situation, and you know the world well enough to know how the world will push back against that, and it all just starts to come together. Like, just going back to what Paddy was saying about writing first drafts and then getting feedback before the story is finished, I find that whenever I do that, it affects the way the story goes. So I try my best to finish something before I start presenting it to other people, because they might pick up on something that they liked that maybe isn't something that you intended to feature heavily in the story, and then you have it in your head, you're like, oh, maybe I should bring that character forwards, or maybe I should lean more into this team. And for me, it just starts to confuse the original idea. So I always try to finish something before I start presenting it.
Another thing is when you oftentimes people will pick up on something that's wrong, and they'll give you a suggestion. But I think Neil Gaiman said this. He's like, people are really good at picking out something that's bad, but they're not necessarily very good at telling you how to fix it. So sometimes someone will give you a suggestion. You'll be like, well, you're right. That doesn't feel right, but that doesn't feel like the solution. And that can be really like mindfucky a little bit.
I've got a great little metaphor for that. It's almost like going to the doctor. So there's a symptom, there's a diagnosis, and there's a prescription. And the idea that a symptom, you can usually always trust your audience on a symptom. Like, it would be rude of you, of the author, to ignore a symptom, because if they're like, oh, this made me feel this way, you can't invalidate the audience by being like, no, you didn't feel that way while reading it. So it's like the audience is always right if they're describing their symptom. But then if the audience tries to diagnose it, there's a chance the audience will be wrong. They're like, oh, I felt this way because of this. If they're a well-read audience, they may have been able to guess that it was pacing. So if I felt it was slow, the diagnosis is because this section was slow. They might sometimes get that correct. They might be wrong. They felt it was slow, maybe for another mechanical reason they haven't been able to pinpoint. So it's take the diagnosis with a grain of salt, come in with your own view to try and work out why they've had that symptom. And then the third one being prescription, how to fix it. Usually the audience isn't always right with prescription. If they're like, here's a suggestion on how to fix it. One, if they've gotten the diagnosis wrong, their prescription's also going to be super wrong. And their diagnosis can be correct and the prescription might still be wrong. Only you as the writer can be like, great, symptom, diagnosis, now I've got to come up with the prescription. And I've always found distilling it into those three categories really helpful. When I have that knee-jerk angry reaction, I'm like, have they given me a symptom, a diagnosis, or a prescription? Sometimes, even working with professionals, the notes I get on my scripts are straight to prescription. And you have to do this weird reverse engineering process, being like, why have they suggested that change? What do they think they've diagnosed? And then what symptom have they picked up on to get to that diagnosis? So it's like going back through the logic. And once I work it out, then I can go forward and make my own decision.
I really like that way of looking at it.
Really good advice.
Yeah, that's good.
I think that nails it.
And that's good as well for giving criticism. If anyone is quick to like be prescribing, definitely good advice. Ali, I wanted to ask you, because I know you and Matan, you both do write your first drafts and then present them to the team for feedback. Is that correct?
And I would say not because I'm particularly brave, but maybe because I'm lazy during a first draft. Maybe because I like to go from start to finish without tinkering. Kind of the process Paddy described before of going back and honing in on every scene is kind of my worst nightmare during a first draft. This university called NIDA I went to, their kind of philosophy at the time they were teaching us was just write the thing start to finish and don't even read it back. There was definitely this hand swatting sense that it's like, no, don't even read it back, because you will start influencing yourself. So it's not even inviting other people into the process to influence you. Don't even let yourself influence your first draft. I do that to a degree. So when I was bringing scenes back to the group, I'd give them one read over to fix mistakes, because I'm not psychotic. But it wasn't hard tinkering. And usually I take notes. So the feedback I'll get, I'll write it all down and I'll put it into a note document. But then I'm like, that's tomorrow Ali's problem. As in, when I finish the first draft, then I go back and look at this bug report of all the notes I've been collecting. I don't go back and interrupt my first drafting with a editing process.
Okay.
That's even that's very similar to how, like, when I'm editing other people's work, that's a very similar process I go through twice. And the first time is I'm just reading through, and anytime I see something that feels off or feels wrong, I'll use your terminology, Ellie, any times I get like symptoms, I just bold it and I just keep going. Maybe obvious things I'll highlight and write notes on, or like if something's hot in my head in the moment, I'll get it out. But I try to keep the momentum going of like, just keep reading the story, highlight, and just keep going. And then when I go back through, then it's just jumping to the bolded points. And then I go into like, all right, now let's really dig down on this and see why it feels weird. And then I do try to give an example of what would fix it if I can. And then like, if they're way off, then I can only give them the symptom. Like, I don't know why, I don't know what you're saying here, but it's like, normally it's just when I actually don't know what they're saying. That's the only time I don't have an example of something to do. But like, yeah.
I really like that approach. I actually want to try that on the next big thing we write, like try doing that. I think that's a good idea.
I found it helps, or it works for me. Ellie, I don't think we ever actually talked about where you are drafting phase wise.
No, so as of yesterday, I finished what I'm kind of calling my proofing draft of my historical fiction manuscript. So since January, I took a step back. I did some big picture thinking about it, decided I was going to make some changes. I went through and made all those changes. So that's what I would call my drafting. I was in and changing things, like actual content was getting changed. But I kind of do that process as in, I have a fun little scene by scene checklist. So I'm a bit of an outliner. So I have all my scenes and I look at that outlining document and I can say if my notes are, this character needs to be focused more on this. I'm changing their arc. So I'll then look at all my scenes and be like, I can hit this new beat here, 4 times. So I kind of pick point, this new scene will now include this. It'll now include this, now include this. So that's like my little roadmap I create, and then I go in and do the draft. So it's a lot of jumping around. That's not a top to bottom drafting. That's I'm just excavating where I need to go. And then so after I've done all that hopping around and changing, ticked off everything on my to-do list, then I do what I've just done, which is what I kind of call my proofing read. So now it's time to read the whole thing through, start to finish, to make sure all my jumping around here and there hasn't done anything too bizarre. And as I mentioned to James before, something that does come out of that process sometimes is I'm reading along, and then one paragraph will just clearly not belong. So everything else might be a wonderful 4th draft, but then I've got this really ugly first draft paragraph sticks out like a sore thumb. And it's usually exists because maybe a beta reader said something offhanded to me, oh, we need more of this. So I've just jumped into that moment and gone, here's more of this, and just punched it straight into the middle without doing the finessing massaging. So I have that, the second read, the proofing read, is when I am able to see those really ugly bits that I've just shoved in. And that's when I take the time to make sure the flow works, make sure it doesn't look unnatural where I've shoved it in and it's belonged there all along. So if I started that, it's probably taken a whole month and a half even just to do this proofing read. It was slower than I thought it would be. And I managed to cut like 4K words organically by doing it, which is nice. I think everything can benefit from being shorter these days. Especially I've heard kind of the environment in publishing at the moment is no one's taking big books. No one likes big books anymore. Yeah. So, but yeah, just yesterday I got to the end and I'm like, oh, done. That was a good feeling. So I'm actually starting my querying process. I've sent off about 5 queries to agents. One of them got back to me within the hour and requested to read it. So that was nice. So that's now off with them.
Nice, yeah.
And yeah, wait to see. And basically, so what this project is it is a trilogy. And now I'm excited because I had started the first draft of what will be book 2, but I'm not stressing myself out about book 2. I'm treating this as my fun writing, just keeping the muscles warm writing. Not that I have any pressure to write book 2. And so, yeah, I'm excited that I get to go back into raw first drafting, the exact opposite of what I've been doing. I get to take off final proofing hat and put on raw drafting hat kind of as of tomorrow. So I get to go through that fun emotional shift.
Yeah,
that's great.
Feels like the difference between being a storyteller and an accountant.
Yes,
Storyteller's like the first draft, accountant is everything afterward.
Yeah,
I think you have to mix it up.
I think that's been quietly in the back of my mind. I'm getting excited for subconsciously. I'm just like, oh, raw first drafting's coming. I get to start that soon. And it does feel like a drug. I don't know about you guys, but once I'm in it, I love it. Yeah.
And, Patty, it's funny what you said about like the storyteller versus the accounting thing, because it is this sort of like left brain, right brain thing. Like the first draft, like I just call it vomiting. Like it's just literally like, let's see what comes out. And then like storytelling, especially long storytelling. Well, maybe not. Maybe this is equally applies to like short stories, but like. It's very mechanical. It's very like you have to make sure everything works. Like motivations have to be very clear. Cause and effect stuff has to be in place more so than in real life, because in real life sometimes stuff just happens. You could argue that's in narrative as well, but it always has to have this causal link. It's like that happened, therefore that happened. Or
it's hard to improvise over a long time period, I think, right? You can improvise short stuff because your brain can hold on to all the moving pieces, but as soon as something gets over a certain size, you can't keep all of that in your mental, what do you call it, whiteboard anymore.
Filing cabinet. I mean, I guess you just have to some degree just have to trust that that's going to happen, but that's a very difficult thing to do, just to be like, well, I guess I'm just going to figure it out and hope that, something leads me to the right source,
or plan meticulously, or
combination
of both.
Exactly. Probably that's the ideal way to just take bits from both aspects and integrate them.
So one thing, I was talking about like my first draft and how I kind of wish I'd just written the whole thing. I was thinking about that though. I think there is a benefit. I've written all these, like I planned for all these dream sequences through my story, and a lot of the feedback I've got is, dream sequences are boring. No one wants to know this character's thoughts and feelings. They want action that moves the story. And if it's not moving the story, like what you were saying, Ali, like you have.
I'm sorry, Patty. I think you're calling me out. I believe I was the one who said this.
You are so many people, honestly. And I had a similar reaction. I'm like, no, I really like this. Like, I don't want to change it. But everyone's right. And when I think back to stories that I've read where the author does, like Ender's Game, where he's playing the video game with the giant.
Yeah,
I just didn't care, man. I was looking through. I don't want this metaphor.
The Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. I know you love that. Like, there's a dream. I actually
do like.
You love that. I've always thought that was boring. I thought that the movie was stronger because it took it out. Maybe that's just a personal thing, but I think that's a key example of what we're talking about.
It's making me wonder, because I actually really did like those. But anyway, my point is that like if people hadn't called me up on that during writing, I would have written this whole thing with the dreams not only in there but really central. So maybe it's a good thing that I was caught early. I don't know. There's probably pros and cons, to both approaches.
Even in Interview with a Vampire, there's the odd dream sequence.
And how are they worthwhile?
I mean, I really do tune out when they're happening, and I've missed parts of the story because the character was maybe not in his perfect mindset, and I was like, oh, this is just another dream sequence, and I tune out, and then I'm like, oh wait, there's actually plot happening right now. I have to go back and listen to it again.
I've had it phrased to me that the reason we do that is dream sequences are like a billboard to the audience that plot is not happening at the moment. They're a pure character explanation. As authors, we love it because it's like, in this scene you're about to get to know the character super well.
You can psychoanalyze your own characters in real time.
But as an audience you're like, oh, I don't need to concentrate because I know I'm not going to miss plot. And that's what the dream sequence subconsciously communicates to an audience.
And it's often like stop of one story and start of another story. And just tell one story.
I would never recommend putting a dream sequence in something, but I feel like if you're gonna do it once and do it short, and just put everything you want to into that dream sequence.
I like fever dreams. I was trying to think if I've snuck any into my historical fiction, and I have a fever dream towards the end that I've gone back and combed to kind of make the centerpiece of the final chapter, and I think I get away with it.
Define fever dream for us.
Yeah, what's a fever dream?
So the character's mind is elsewhere and thinks they're in another location, but the audience has already been primed to know exactly where they are and what's actually happening. So you've got like 2 layers of story happening. So my character's trapped in a cabin and can't get out, so they're losing their mind a little bit, but thinks he's trapped in a different jail cell like 10 years earlier. So we're getting the memories and like the weird in and out dream-esque unfolding of the memories, but the audience is like, we know he's interacting with the real world current time location he's in. So like both get to happen. Plot's still moving because he's trapped in the current cell, but weaving in dreams and memories.
So like a hallucination almost.
Hallucination, yeah.
That sounds a lot different from this chapter. Is about the character wandering through empty streets, meeting characters that he's not really supposed to be meeting. That sounds dynamic enough that it wouldn't cause that usual problem with the dreams.
But at the end of the day, like in real brutal terms, it is a shoehorning in of backstory and character psyche. So everything that is gratuitous about a dream sequence, this fever dream is doing as well. But at least I've attempted to anchor it in real-time plot at the same time. But we'll see if I've pulled it off. But that was the thinking behind it anyway.
It's interesting. There is a section in the novel that I'm trying to write at the moment where the character gets badly injured, and then I injected basically a flashback into that, which was supposed to be him reliving the incident. But it does, from what you were saying, I think it would probably make sense to intersplice that with the immediate consequences of his injury, so that the reader would be engaged and be like, oh, is he dying right now? Is that what's happening?
I feel like we could almost do a whole episode on dream sequences, flashbacks, and stories within stories.
That would be fun.
Yeah.
And the audience just can completely tune out to that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Inception did dream sequences very well. Just saying.
Actually,
But that is a
Just
plot thing.
That's it.
Because
That's,
there's plot.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
it's a
actually,
dream sequence
It's a fine
joke.
line though.
Yeah, but it's true. It's because they're plot. It's because plot is still happening.
And the threat is in the dream.
Yes.
Yes,
But
actual
Matrix.
stakes. Yeah.
Matrix is technically a big dream sequence, but I think technically. I mean,
Technically.
Kind of.
like technically to that.
Sci-fi is fun because we get to bend those rules mechanically.
I was actually thinking about this, and I'll keep this brief because this is not so much drafting, but I mean, it came into draft feedback, I guess. But I've actually, just a few days ago, James, was thinking about one of your stories. I forget what it was called. I think you said it earlier, but the one about the farmer's journal, and he's rereading about, last winter. Yeah. I was just thinking about that, and it was like feedback Matan gave about like just wanting some stakes for the narrator, because he felt disconnected from the threat because the threat was in past tense. It was something that had already happened. It wasn't where the reader was. And I love that as feedback, because it does add so much to have just some pressing threat, something that the reader might be aware of, but maybe the narrator is not, but something in the present that's just making sure that there's threat where the reader is, some suspense where the reader is. It's like in what is it? Oh, Hunger Games. It's one of the last movies, and it's like Katniss is in the safe place and everyone else goes out on a mission. And it's like, oh, well, I'm not super invested in this mission because the character I'm most invested in isn't in danger here. So it's like, just whatever, we'll see what happens. But it's just kind of I'm more in observation state as opposed to projecting myself into it. And it's I think it's important to have someone the reader cares about, or some representation of them. The reader has to have a proxy in those moments, I guess.
Yeah, I love that.
I honestly think we should do an episode about this kind of stuff now, right? Like,
Yeah,
where the
table
story
it.
is in relation.
Yeah,
to
put it on the
it.
chart. Yeah, put it on.
Yeah.
Add it into the list. And Paddy, I wanted to ask you about your drafting and editing process.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first long thing I've written. I'd like to say that I just like write it all out, but I think I do a lot of revising and obsessively questioning my own stuff as I go. Yeah,
But even on your short stories and stuff, what was the goal there?
it was a lot of the same thing. It was writing with the goal to just write it all out, but then I can't help but go back and want to change it. You know, I can't help but do the self-critical thing of like, is this good? Is this bad? What could I do? Which is, again, I think being to my detriment. And next time I really want to just try and write. And who said, which one of us said like you write but you don't even look at your own work? Was that you, Ali?
Yeah, or at least encouraged to not read it back as I go.
That school of thought.
Yeah.
To defend your writing style though, Paddy, when we have been exposed to your early stuff, like it reads as if every word is incredibly deliberate.
And that's because it has been, because I've been obsessing over it. But a lot of that is fear of anyone seeing my stuff without it being like in its perfect form. Like there's really that, like I have a lot of that artist fear of like, I don't want people to see my bad stuff because they might think I'm bad, which is self-defeating, but I do it.
Well, I think it's important to remember that the critic's gaze on something is not by dint of that particular gaze better than the original artist stuff. Like, yeah, you can make something better, but there's a really good point that anything you're going over is just kind of deck chairs on the Titanic, you know, like maybe the stuff that you're obsessing over is how good is that phrase, by the way? I use that whenever.
But what does it mean? Like it could like topple over.
Okay, rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It's kind of like
okay, because this was going to go.
You're like, but maybe it should be over there. Do you know what I mean? Like
it's
possible that your inner critic, not yours specifically, but anyone's inner critic is missing the big picture stuff and just like moving little things around. Like that's always the fear, I think. So I'm just like, look, I'll get it all down and then come back and comb over it.
That's because you're very good at not giving an F.
Well, that's true, and maybe it's to my
good.
You know, because maybe
I don't know. You write a lot more than me, so.
I mean, look, that is an entire different conversation about like whether it's better to churn it out or just make smaller, like very, very highly polished things. So I think about that stuff as well a lot. But anyway,
we'll also add that to the list.
Yeah, for sure.
I think my process again comes back to a little bit of screenwriting, in that you can never be too precious about it in screenwriting, because you can slave a draft after draft after draft, and then at the last minute you're told, oh, we couldn't cast this actor, so now the gender and their race has changed, and you're just like, okay, redraft again. So it's like you can't be precious about some things. You got to be willing to take big step backs. The big picture thinking has changed, and be willing to go in. So it's I got used to letting go of it very quickly. So I think I've got a similar sense that I don't go in and slave over my tiny words in a first draft, because I'm like, it's all going to change anyway. It's all going to change.
Rocking back and forth.
Writing big like lines across the page. It's all going to change.
Yeah, I guess there's no way to know how much is going to change ahead of time, so it's kind of a gamble, right? Like maybe there's going to be a massive rewrite, maybe it's going to be,
Totally. You never know what it's going to be.
You never know what it's going to be.
All right, so we're coming up on the 50-minute mark. So somebody has a reading.
Yes, I've got a
yes.
reading.
Have you read before? I didn't think you have, right?
I have. No, I've actually gone twice. So this will be my third reading. Lots of reading from Ali.
Yeah.
So context. I've gone and said this is nice and polished and proof, so this will be embarrassing if it's not. Now. Why I thought this would be a good example is because this was a scene that came in later drafts. So it wasn't part of the first draft, beautiful, fun creation. It was born of a couple of beta feedback that kind of agreed something was missing towards the end. So that was how this existed. And it's also fun because I haven't spent as much time on this scene compared to all the other scenes. So while I'm proofing all the other scenes and I'm like, I know this so well, I've been in the trenches with this scene forever, this one I can read it and it still felt a little fresh and like it surprised me a little bit just because I didn't know it as well. context-wise, so listeners can listen to this excerpt and not be completely alienated. So it is towards the end of the book, so spoilers, I guess. If I've got like the protagonist and an antagonist. The protagonist has just survived their ordeal. They're up on the ship, kind of yelling down at a little canoe. And the antagonist is in the canoe. He's got a musket looking back up at the boat. And this scene is actually written from the antagonist's point of view. All right, I'll leave it at that. Mutineers, Swallow cried in mock alarm and pointed down at their canoe. Villains, convicts, he spat into the sea in disgust. Shut your mouth, Swallow, Leslie barked and readjusted the musket. Or I've got a more sure way of guaranteeing some permanent peace round here. Is that to be my pleasure? Swallow asked, leaning over the rail. You failed to starve me, to induce my suicide. He patted the cutlass he now wore on his hip. And now you've come to finally see it done. Ferguson, I admire your ability to repeatedly cock up a task and never see fault in your own skill. If you step aboard these planks, you'll answer to each one of us, Jones added. Leslie was surprised to see the stern nods of agreement from the rest of the balls, many of which had now armed themselves with saws and hammers, the tools of their original mutiny. These sods would still risk themselves for that prick, even after he had proved his deceitful, vile nature. Leslie eased his grip on the musket. He need not. Bloodshed wouldn't be necessary. Doing so would only piss off the locals and the Yankees he hoped to secure passage from. All he need do was send a message. I'm not here for your ship, he yelled back. We're making sure you don't come off it. He pointed to the beach behind them. Anyone who steps on land gets a pellet in the skull. From beside Leslie, Maguire joined in. We're bound for the Zebra. Listen now, those shipmate positions are guaranteed to us. The Zebra? What dignified man would crew a ship with such a name? Swallow answered. This is no funny thing, Williams, Leslie said. I mean it. Better take only one or two. I'll be damned sure you won't be one of them. That's my message to you. Even now, Leslie feared the conniving whoreson would still find a way to wiggle from this, claim that shipmate spot, and leave them all to die. He was the insect you couldn't quite swat, or the shit you could never fully scrape from your boot. Common sense told Leslie to pull the trigger that instant. Otherwise, he'd be forced to deal with the mess Swallow left in his wake. Perhaps the Crown was right to try and send this one to Macquarie Harbour in the first. Yet, if Leslie did kill him, likely Swallow's ghost would only return to mock him for the rest of his days. While Leslie didn't truly believe in ghosts, he was never more certain of the fact that God had put William Swallow on this earth to be in close proximity to Leslie at all times, tasked with finding new and inventive ways of being an insufferable little cunt. Swallow looked to the other men either side of him and seemed to come to a decision. Why would I volunteer for passage when I captain my own vessel? I sail home under my own strength and command, Leslie. Taking orders does not agree with me. Above, Davis thumped Swallow on the back. The half-starved man wheezed from the blow. Leslie sighed and lowered his musket, his relief tainted by exasperation. This tit was more insane than even he had guessed. 12 men to crew the Pacific, Leslie warned. I promised all who followed you would wind up dead. Just see if I'm wrong. You're welcome to defecate on my grave, should it happen, Ferguson, Swallow replied. Then a steady smile grew across his face. Doesn't this bring to mind a similar conversation exchanged with a boatload of men in piss-soaked breeches? From these very rails, in fact, Swallow patted the timber fondly. I'll grant you this, Leslie. You're far more entertaining than Lieutenant Carew. On and on he twittered, seemingly unable to help himself. Except I plan to keep my ship and sword and reunite with my family speedily enough. We're done here, Leslie said, and waved for the other cocks to lower their muskets. Get rowing.
There was the C-bomb. There it is.
No, that was very well placed, actually. Very well placed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if
It
it's in
landed well.
historical English, then
Landed.
it sounds fine.
Yeah. And that was a quote, right? Oh, no, I think it wasn't. It wasn't.
Yes, I allowed myself a single C-bomb in the entire manuscript, and there it was.
That was a good spot for it.
Well
Yeah.
placed. Well placed.
Yeah.
I'd like to think you had the post-its all up on the wall and you were just like, where can I?
The one person.
Whoa, one post-it just had that word on it.
Where's it's going to go
Where
for
does
maximum
it
effect?
fit? Where does it go?
Where do you live?
Right in the third last scene.
Yeah.
I reckon if
Make
they've
'em
gone
make
through the
most of
whole
it.
book and there's no C words, by that point they're convinced they're not reading a book that will have any sequence.
Yeah.
And the
They
censors
should
might miss it by that point as well.
Save it for the end. Yeah.
Is that the only scene in which Leslie is in? Or like he's the POV character, or
His only POV. So yes,
That's fun.
I've done two bizarre things. Like the book does jump to other POVs every now and then, but saving it right for the end, Leslie's final scene is from his POV.
That's good.
Again, I'm working in comedy, so I think I can get away with those bizarre, jarring choices. If this was a different genre, maybe suddenly jumping to that POV wouldn't work. But some feedback I've gotten is people are like confused for the first bit, and then they're like, wait, is this a Ferguson POV? And people kind of get rewarded by that right at the end. So that's what I'm hoping. That's how it lands.
Yeah, no, I think it works. So like I've noticed recently, like a few books I'm reading will have main POVs, and then they have these little side POVs dotted in. And I think that looks really, really well if it's done.
Yeah, I like it.
Well. Like, yeah, something I want to work on. Like with the next project I do is. I liked it though. It's good.
Is this, you said this, out of which phase of drafting did this scene come? You said it was out of one of the later draft, or it came from one of your beta readers that this scene was born.
Yes. So a first and a 1.5 draft, I guess, existed without this scene. And because the antagonist gets away with being kind of lovable, I've managed to write an antagonist where people are like, yeah, but he's kind of right the whole time.
I wouldn't call him lovable, but I think he's kind of right sometimes.
Yeah, he gets to have like the sensible opinion. So he's kind of an antagonist people didn't want to see tossed aside. They're like, do we just need a bit of closure for this antagonist we've had the entire book?
It's like the ghost of common sense almost.
That's awesome.
I've had it phrased to me that he does one reprehensible thing at the end. So like the whole book ramps up being like kind of a tug of war between them as to like who could be morally correct. And then definitely the antagonist does make a decision where they're definitely in the morally wrong. So that solidifies it. That's kind of the climax of the book. But this was still just so we're in the denouement of the book at this point, and this is the final scene with him as well. It's a very short scene. So I read about 600, 500, 6. Oh my God. 650 is the number I'm trying to say.
6500.
But the scene maybe only has a few more paragraphs at the beginning and at the end. It's actually quite a short scene.
Right on.
Cool. Okay. I have a quote. This is a shorty today from the great Ernest Hemingway, which is write drunk, edit sober, which I quite like. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
I think he actually did too. Although, but he might have been writing drunk as well. So who could say?
Yeah. I'd say that's just like from his diary more than anything. Like metaphor.
Which apparently is very good. I think it's called
his diary.
Yeah.
I was kidding, but yeah, Hemingway's diary would be great.
No, well, autobiography, maybe not diary.
Yeah.
And every autobiography they release actually smells like rum, just like
it's
like a scratch and sniff.
Yeah.
Every page feels like dried out and all the ink is
God. Yeah.
I like the idea that Alex just thought that autobiographies were people's diaries. Everyone's just publishing their diaries these days. It's crazy.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Okay, and that has been episode 7 of Prose Cons podcast.
Wow.
Thank you, listeners.
Awesome.
And goodbye.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.